again, and welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. Today, we get to chat with Juliëtte Sterkens. And Juliëtte started out as an audio pathologist. She started out doing other things relating to audio, but now she's an expert in dealing with hearing loops, hearing aids, and other things. And we're going to even get a demo in the course of today about what a hearing loop does, why it's better in a lot of cases than a hearing aid, and a number of other things. So I'm not going to give it all away. Where is the fun in that? So Juliëtte, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Michael, for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you doing it. And I know that you have a lot to tell us about. So I'd love to start kind of at the beginning. You're from the Netherlands. So tell us a little bit about growing up there, what it was like, school, or anything else about your life, why you were in the Netherlands and why you went into what you went into and so on.
Michael, I was born to two Dutch parents. So that's how I lived in the Netherlands. My father was in the military, and we moved around quite a bit during my youth. So the nice thing about that is I have friends all over the country. Of course, the Netherlands isn't very big. And in 1976, after I graduated from high school, I enrolled in a program to become a logopedist. That is a speech pathologist, speech language pathologist. But in the Netherlands, it also includes being a teacher for the deaf. So it also includes acouphedie. But about a couple of weeks into my program, I met an American officer in the military, met him in a scuba diving club, and he and I dated 2 years while he was stationed in the Netherlands, and then he moved back to the States. We dated long distance 3 years, finished my schooling. My parents wanted me to work before just moving to the United States. I'm sure they were hoping I would meet a lovely person in the Netherlands. But anyway, our love persisted, and I moved to the United States in 1981. And at that point, I had to choose whether I wanted to continue in speech language pathology or whether I wanted to switch careers into audiology. And that's how come I switched and enrolled at the University of Wisconsin in their audiology program. And in 1983, I graduated as a newly minted American audiologist.
Well, of course, one of the questions that has to come up is, since you moved to the U.S., your parents have accepted love and the two of you together?
They sure have. They sure have. I also am the proud, I don't want to call it owner, but we have 2 children. And of my 3 sisters, I'm the only one with grandchildren from my marriage. I have a sister who has bonus kids, but I have 2 children. And that meant that they came to visit me frequently, of course. And we've also made the trek back to the Netherlands many times.
Why did you have to switch from speech pathology into audiology?
That's a good question. The ASHA, the American Speech and Hearing Association, certifies speech pathologists as well as audiologists, and they're 2 different fields of studies. And when I went to school, I had to get a master's degree, and I literally had to choose: do you want to become a speech pathologist? Do you want to become an audiologist? And at that time, I had already done some work at an audiology center in the Netherlands. I really enjoyed the field. I wanted to get more involved in the Netherlands. I didn't work with hearing aids, didn't fit hearing aids, but in the US, audiologists not only do the hearing testing, but they also fit hearing aids. And that was just an area that fascinated me. So I switched, and it was a very small program at UW Oshkosh, but very involved in the community and well known in Northeast Wisconsin for testing children. And that was an area that I was very interested in. So I was very lucky, great professor, great fellow students, some of which are still friends to this day. It's hard to believe it's almost 40 years ago since I graduated.
What is the difference between speech pathology and audiology?
So speech pathologists are far more involved with speech, articulation, ameliorating the effects from strokes, helping kids that have cerebral palsy, have difficulty speaking, helping children in this country to acquire speech and language if they're hard of hearing or deaf. And audiologists are far more involved with hearing, with the ear, in some, not me personally, but there's many audiologists involved in the testing of balance as well, balance and hearing.
So you said not you. What is it that you do?
Well, back in 1983, I got hired as an audiologist in a private practice in Oshkosh. And in that office, we did hearing testing, industrial hearing testing, but we also did hearing aid fittings. And that's really the area that I eventually specialized in, hearing aid fittings, helping people with hearing loss, either acquired at or before birth or acquired at a later age, to live successfully with hearing loss and help them adapt to hearing aids.
And so you've done a lot of work and a lot of research, and you've done a lot of speaking, right? Haven't you, as far as traveling around to talk about this topic?
I have. But really, what I probably should explain to the viewers or to the listeners first is that hearing loss is kind of misunderstood, right? In the sense that people think that hearing aids are like eyeglasses. If you have vision difficulties, unless it's macular degeneration, eyeglasses can essentially restore poor vision to near normal. And they think that hearing aids can restore hearing to normal. The problem is that hearing aids can't do that, don't do that. Hearing aids at best correct for about half of the degree of hearing loss. And that means that people with hearing loss will continue to have difficulties hearing or understanding. They say hearing, but in effect, they have difficulties understanding speech. When people speak fast, when there's background noise, when people have accents, hearing aids, in effect, pick up all the background noise and making it very difficult for that impaired ear to pick out the speech from the noise. So when a person wears or gets hearing aids, they're frequently surprised. You know, they think that they're going to hear like they did when they were 25. For example, if I'm dealing with somebody who's worked in a lot of noise or who farmed. And then as an audiologist, I would have to explain, well, hearing aids can help, but they don't give you normal hearing. But there are workarounds. There are things that we can do to help overcome the limitations that your hearing loss imposes on you or that the hearing aids impose on you. And just one simple example, most hearing aids nowadays come or can come equipped with TV transmitters. So you plug in a little dongle in the back of your TV, and when you watch television, the TV sends the audio wirelessly to the hearing aids. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're hearing under earphones. It's fantastic, right? Hearing aids come with little microphones that you can clip on somebody's lapel if you're driving in a car. And now you can hear that person very close to the microphone. But in public places, people have trouble hearing. And could be a church, could be a house of worship, could be a theater, could be a library meeting room. The hearing aids are really, their effective range is about 3 to 6 feet. For some people, it might be 9 feet or 10 feet, but there is a limited range where hearing aids work well. And beyond that distance, they're going to pick up a lot of background noise and reverberation. And as a radio man, you know about that. You know that you need to speak close to your microphone, because if you don't, your voice isn't going to sound good on the recording. So for years, Michael, I explained to my patients that if they would go to the theater, if they would go to a church, they should pick up what is called an assistive listening device. And that's when people go, what the heck is an assistive listening device? Assistive listening devices are systems, or assistive listening systems are devices or systems mandated under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a law that you're very familiar with. That law mandates that light switches have to be at a certain height in a room, that there needs to be enough clearance in the doors so someone with a wheelchair can get in, and that there's Braille signs installed in places so that people like you can read the Braille information and know whether to go right or left to the bathroom. Am I right?
As far as it goes, of course, you need to know where the Braille sign is, and if there is a
Absolutely.
crowd, you don't get the information. So there are limitations to all of that. But I hear what you're saying.
Yes. And so these assistive listening systems were being installed, but the systems required that the consumer would go to a service desk and pick up a listening device. And that means, how do you know when you go to the theater that you have trouble hearing until the show starts, right? So now you're going to have to go back to the service desk, pick up a listening device, and sit down. My experience was, Michael, that my patients didn't bother with these systems. They didn't want to use these systems. Well, fast forward to 2008. I am at a meeting for consumers who are hard of hearing, and a professor from Hope College in Michigan came to speak about a topic called hearing loops. And I'm the only audiologist in the room. And I was familiar with hearing loops. They were already in the schools for the deaf and the hard of hearing in the Netherlands back in the 70s when I was going to school. But they were not being used in this country. And Dave Myers started to explain how he had been able to foster hearing loops in Western Michigan to great benefit of the users. And maybe a little sidebar, a hearing loop is an assistive listening system that broadcasts the audio from the PA system wirelessly to the hearing aid, as long as the hearing aid has a T-Coil built in.
What is a T-Coil?
It's a little copper coil, a tiny coil that's maybe 2 millimeters in height, a millimeter in width, that is embedded in hearing aids and has been in hearing aids for 50, 60 years. And if you have a T-Coil in your hearing aid and there is a hearing loop installed, when you go to the theater, you don't have to go to the front desk and pick up a system or a listening device. You can just sit, activate the T-Coil on the hearing aid. Generally, it means pushing a button on a hearing aid, and activate that feature in your hearing aid. And now the sound from the PAC system starts streaming direct in the hearing aid. And suddenly, the consumer, the user of the hearing aid, who was really struggling to hear voices from the stage or from a lectern or from an altar, can hear that audio wirelessly direct in their ear. And if the hearing aid is programmed properly, it'll do so without any background noise.
How is
And
that? Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, ask your question.
How is that different, or why is that more effective than what you described earlier, which is the person who gets a hearing aid that has technology that plugs into the television and then broadcasts to the hearing aid?
The technology that is used for little remote microphones or televisions is Bluetooth technology. But that it's the sound transmission is happening via Bluetooth. That technology cannot be used in live events because there is a significant delay of the audio because of the processing that's happening. The sound has to come from a Bluetooth transmitter, go to a smartphone, from the smartphone to the hearing aid, and if the Wi-Fi in the building isn't very fast, the audio arrives in the ear at great latencies. So there is no, at this time, public assistive listening systems that use Bluetooth that happen in real time. And for that reason, we use FM, infrared, or hearing loop technology for publicly installed assistive listening systems.
So the coil and the loop is actually transmitting FM then that the coil receives. Is that what I'm gathering?
What's happening, the hearing loop in its simplest form is a copper wire installed around the perimeter of a seated area. So let's say it's a meeting room. There's a hearing loop installed in the floor or in the ceiling. When an audio signal is amplified through that wire, it creates changes in the magnetic field. And the coil, of course, can be magnetically induced. That signal can be picked up by the little coil in the hearing aid with the exact same clarity as the audio that's being broadcast by the wire.
How does the information get to the loop?
From a microphone. So a hearing loop system needs to be connected to a microphone from a PA system that's installed in a room. So foremost, there has to be a PA system in the room. There has to be a microphone being used at the lectern. That signal isn't only sent to the speakers so that the audio is broadcast into the room, that signal is also broadcast to a hearing loop amplifier. And the amplifier is broadcasting the audio via electromagnetic waves into the room that the hearing aid can pick up.
So that's even different than you'd mentioned FM before. So you're not even really using FM there.
No, you're not.
Unless you're using a microphone that does FM that goes to the PA system that goes to the loop.
Yes, so there are assistive listening systems that use FM technology, but that requires every user of the system to go and pick up an FM receiver.
Right.
And frequently they come with headphones.
Right.
And the headphones are generic, are not specifically programmed for the user's hearing aids. And the T-Coil and the hearing aid that the consumer is wearing is programmed specifically for their hearing loss. So activating a T-Coil in a hearing aid and hearing in the loop means that the consumer hears the sound as it was meant for their individual prescription. So in the grand scheme of things, if a consumer is either asked to go to a service desk and pick up a listening device, or just walk into a facility, sit down, and when the show starts, turn on a T-Coil in a hearing aid, what do you suppose the consumer will choose?
They're going to choose the thing that will give them the the greatest ability to hear or to get the information that is actually being provided. So of course they're going to use the loop and the coil if they have the
They are.
option.
They are, and it's so convenient. And so when I heard Dr. David Meyer speak in 2008, and he mentioned how hearing loops were making a comeback, greater awareness of the ADA and the requirement that these systems have to be hearing aid compatible, I just went, oh my God, I mean, there's the solution to my patient's problems. And basically, all I wanted to do, Michael, is help my patients here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. If I can get these loops installed in churches and in the Oshkosh Grand Opera House, my patients are just going to think this is wonderful. And it blew my patients away how they could go to a church and sit down and activate their telecoil and hear. And from starting what I initially called the Oshkosh Hearing Loop Initiative, I also ended up seeing patients in from Neenah and from Appleton, and they wanted loops in their churches. So pretty soon it kind of blossomed out to the Fox Valley area. We are about an hour south of Green Bay in Wisconsin. And then I also started educating audiologists in the state why this is good, not only for their patients, but it's also good for them. If your patients, if the places where your patients do the most complaining about their hearing aids, if you can make them among their best places to hear, they're going to love you. Not only that, they're going to talk very positively about hearing aids. They're going to encourage their friends to look into this. So it's good PR. It's good advertising.
So a loop essentially goes around the whole room perimeter.
There's different kinds of loop configurations. If a building doesn't have a lot of metal, if it's an older structure, for example, and I'm just a Lutheran church in Oshkosh with a basement and a community gathering space underneath the sanctuary, the loop can literally be installed as one big loop around the seated area in the church. And the loop will not only broadcast the audio into the church itself, into the sanctuary, but also into the basement. If a facility has a lot of metal, for example, a library meeting room with a lot of steel reinforced concrete, that facility will require what is called a phased array loop. And it's an array of multiple wires in the shape of loops that are laid on top of each other in order to create a strong enough signal. So there's much more involved than me saying, oh, all you have to do is string a wire around the perimeter of a room. And that's why trained loop installers are so important in this process.
How expensive is it to install a loop?
Yeah.
That's going to be a question that comes up a lot.
It's absolutely going to be a question. Now, do people ask you how expensive it is to install braille signs or install wheelchair ramps?
Oh, sure.
You get that question also. Okay. Well, and
it's even, well, when it comes to wheelchair ramps, it's too expensive. I can't afford to do that now. And the ADA, I won't say gives them an out, but the ADA says unless you're doing other major modification to a building, then you don't need to go off and modify it to install the ramp. But if you're modifying, then you have to include the ramp. Of course, if you're building a new building, the cost to put in a ramp is negligible, if anything at all, because you just design it in.
Exactly.
So it's all in the aftermarket part where those costs come in. For braille signs, again, there are assumptions as to how expensive or not it really is, so that the questions do come up.
Yeah. And you know what? That's a very interesting perspective for me to learn about. In Wisconsin, a lot of hearing loops are being installed in the price ranges of $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. It really, again, it depends on the amount of metal in the building, the size of the facility, the size of the room that you want looped, and the cost of hiding the wire, the effort required to hide the wire. So if there's carpet tiles in a meeting room, they can just easily be pulled up.
Sure.
Flat wire can be installed underneath the carpet tiles. Carpet tiles go down, and literally it can be done in a day, in a couple of hours. They can also be installed in the ceiling. But you're absolutely right. If you're dealing with very large facilities where there's permanent carpeting installed, now the carpeting has to be cut, right? And that people are leery of having that done. So in Oshkosh, I found that the places that aren't even mandated to have assistive listening systems installed were the most receptive. And those were houses of worship. Because where do people go 50, 60 times a year and want to hear, need to hear, right? So a lot of my effort in the beginning circled around places that I knew were remodeling, places that I knew would be receptive, and those were the houses of worship my patients belonged to. Literally, I would go to meetings. If there was a new school in the process of being installed, I would reach out to the school or to the architects. A lot of my work has involved reaching out to architects who think that all assistive listening systems are alike. And if that's the case, let's put in the cheapest one.
Of course.
And that's an FM system. But there's much greater awareness among consumers. I have done a lot of work around the country educating hearing care professionals. And the Hearing Loss Association of America, HLAA, they have started what is called a Get in the Hearing Loop program. They are literally actively advocating on behalf of consumers with hearing loss.
Well, it's interesting. This is truly all about, if you will, electrical or electronic induction.
Yes.
Having grown up in a science-oriented world, I understand what electric transformers are. We hear all the time about transformers, and now a lot of the technology is a little bit different, but really a transformer, the thing that you would plug in and you would then get a stepped up current or voltage or whatever, was all about induction. And if we won't go into transformer theory here, but it's perfectly understandable to anyone that studies electricity and electronics why this system kind of works, because you're literally just creating a magnetic field, and the coil is the other part of, if you will, the transformer that is integrated into a hearing aid or into an assisted living device and is picking up the magnetic pulse changes from the loop. So
direct.
From an electronic standpoint, this is electrically trivial. There's nothing new that we haven't known for years.
No. But the issue has been that consumers aren't educated about this technology. They don't even know this type of accommodation exists. And there has been some resistance on behalf of the hearing care professionals who say, well, but putting a telecoil in a hearing aid makes it bigger, makes the hearing aid bigger. And while that is true, it also makes the hearing aid a lot more useful, a lot more beneficial. So it's educating not just the consumer, but the hearing care professional, that in the end, the consumer wears the hearing aid to hear better, right? And it is up to the hearing care professionals to educate consumers that these types of systems and technologies exist. So there's a lot of people who are walking on this earth with hearing aids that have built-in T-Coils, but the T-Coil may have never been activated. It needs to be activated in the computer by the hearing care professional. The hearing care professional may have never demonstrated the benefit of a hearing loop. So I would love for the listeners to demonstrate what a hearing loop can do. And I have a little audio demonstration that, if you would permit me, I'd be happy to play that so that the listeners can hear what the difference is all about.
Sure, let's do that. And you go ahead and set that up, and I will just explain what Juliette is doing. Is she's going to share her screen. She's enabled her audio so that we'll be able to hear this demo. And what you're going to hear, I have not heard it all the way through, but what you will hear is what essentially a person not close to a stage will hear just with a hearing aid. And then, as I understand it, the T-Coil will be activated.
Correct. So the first half is the audio as if it were coming through the hearing aid's microphone, and the second half is as if it's coming through the loop. So let's see if technology works. Here we go.
That's right.
And she was dreading getting older. Well, what's the only way to avoid getting older is to die, right? Now, we all want to live a long life. We apparently just don't want to get old in order to...
Sitting there and our young people in their 20s and 30s and 40s making fun of older people, making cracks about older people. They're making fun of what they themselves are going to become.
And it's clear what happened there, because at first what we were hearing was the microphone in the hearing aid picking up not only the speaker from some distance away, but all the other ambient sounds.
Yep.
And no matter how directional you make a microphone, it's still going to pick up what's between you and the person speaking. But then when the loop and the coil were activated, or the loop was activated all along, but when the coil was activated, now you're hearing just what comes from the loop. So the only way you would hear ambient noise besides the speaker speaking is if the speaker's microphone picked up that information.
Michael, that's really perceptive. The hearing aid can be programmed to still pick up some ambient sound, because you can imagine if you're very hard of hearing and you switch your hearing aid to T-Coil, you stop being able to hear your own voice. You no longer hear the person sitting to your left or your right at that meeting. You're only hearing what's coming through the mic from the PA system. And that can be kind of isolating. And in church, you can't hear yourself sing, right? And so as an audiologist, I can program the hearing aid to pick up ambient sound, but turn down the sensitivity by 5 or by 6 or by 10 decibels. So you can still hear, but it's a lot quieter. And that makes the sound from the loop stand out even more, so that the understanding, the signal to noise ratio is improved to a level where you can just sit back and hear and follow the meeting with ease. And it blew my patients away. I had patients tell me, after they had an experience in a loop, one person told me, and this is a gentleman who was very hard of hearing, was only wearing one hearing aid, the other ear was deaf. And he said to me, I can hear so well in a loop. So that's what it must be like to be normal hearing. And he had been hard of hearing his whole life. But hearing in a loop can be life-changing for people who have lost a lot of their hearing. And that's really what motivates me. And it was the reason I stepped out of my practice, Michael. Back in 2012, I gave up my audiology practice to become HLAA's national hearing loop advocate. And, Michael, of course, it helps that I like to talk. But I do a lot of consumer education, a lot of public speaking, professional meetings, a lot of lectures. And then when the pandemic hit, it also gave me a new way to reach out to people via Zoom. So I've done lots of Zoom lectures about the technology and just trying to reach more and more people. So you inviting me to this podcast is huge because you've got a listenership. Different, the more people hear of this technology, they go, wait, I may not use hearing aids, but my mom does, or my dad, or I have a neighbor, or I have a friend, or I belong to a church, and why don't we have this in our church? And I'm really proud to tell you that we're almost at 500 churches in Wisconsin. Almost 900 places have installed these hearing loop systems. And it's kind of moving by word of mouth because they work. They work well. And once they're installed, it's like electrical wire. Once it's installed, you're done.
Going back to something that you said earlier, today in our world with hearing aids being manufactured in an ever increasing number, how many of the hearing aids include the little T-Coils?
Yeah, the percentages vary. For people who are severely hard of hearing, so these are people who without a hearing aid can barely hear normal conversation, or people to whom we have to shout in order to be barely heard. The numbers are between 50 and 90%. And frankly, it depends a little bit on the philosophy of the audiologist. My philosophy was, it was really about giving my patients as many tools in their hearing aid toolkit as I could give them. And some audiologists are perhaps working with manufacturers where the T-Coil indeed makes the hearing aid a little bit larger. And when that happens, they may opt for the smaller hearing aid rather than ask the patient, where do you not want to hear, right? I mean, you're getting a hearing aid to hear. And the consumer doesn't really understand that the hearing aid is still a compromise. So a lot of my outreach has also been to educate consumers how to buy hearing aids. What are the features that are important that they look at? And certainly if people are watching or listening to this recording, there's a website called hearingloss.org. That is HLAA's national website, where there's lots of good information for consumers about hearing, living with hearing loss, how to buy hearing aids. There's also a website called hearingloop.org. That is the website from Dr. David Myers at Hope College. It's only informational website so that consumers can learn more about hearing loops themselves.
So again, though, going back to the discussion of hearing aid manufacturing, there are still a number of hearing aids that are being constructed without putting the coils in them.
Correct. Some of it, why?
Go ahead. No, how expensive is it to truly put a coil in? Maybe a better way to put it is, why don't we just do it in all hearing aids, because you don't know where they're going to end up?
Exactly. I wish you would come with me when I talk to the hearing aid manufacturers and ask that common sense question. The coil itself has been estimated to add between $2 and $5 to the cost of a hearing aid, but to integrate it in the software, in the programming of the device, obviously there's a greater expense involved. And it's my understanding that there can be some interference with the coil and the rechargeability of the hearing aid. So what we're seeing is that there are some rechargeable hearing aids on the market where they don't add a telecoil to the device. But the manufacturers have heard me. I've been very vocal at conferences and meetings with manufacturers, and the manufacturers have now added telecoils to the remote microphones. So if you are listening to this broadcast and you think, I have a hearing aid, but I don't think I have a T-coil, all is not lost. You may be able to get access to the signals from hearing loops if you ask if your audiologist can provide you with a remote control that has the T-coil built in. It becomes a little bit more cumbersome, a little bit trickier to use. Think of my mother who's 96. You know, she can find the push button on the hearing aid, but she would have a heck of a time with a remote control and keeping it charged and all that other extra stuff that you have to do.
Yeah, and that's understandable. So it gets back to ease of use. What do you think is the ramification for all this of now the FDA saying we don't need to have prescriptions for hearing aids, which I would think is going to cause prices to drop, but also numbers of hearing aids probably to increase?
The good news is that there are some over-the-counter devices that have telecoils built in. So there aren't many, but there are a couple that have the T-coil built in, and there's outreach being done to other manufacturers to include the telecoil, again, because it doesn't add a lot to the expense of the devices. The over-the-counter devices, I think, will make people more aware that something can be done. They may not be as adjustable to their specific hearing loss. They may not have the same sound. They may not be as durable as some of the hearing aid devices. I mean, these hearing aid devices, I've worked with hearing aids that could easily last 6, 7, 8, 9 years. Imagine worn on your ears when you perspire, handled dirt and dust and what have you, but these hearing aids keep on going. And I wonder about the durability of over-the-counter devices. Are they going to be the same? And is the consumer going to know how to clean them, how to maintain them, what to do when they get earwax in them? The audiologist does a lot more than fitting the hearing aid. They counsel patients, you know, how to live better with hearing loss, how they maintain the hearing aids. I used to see some people back every 3 or 4 months just because of the problems that they had with earwax, and others I would only see once a year or only when they had a problem. But these over-the-counter devices, it means that the consumer has to become the expert, right? And what are they going to do when the hearing aid malfunctions? Are they going to take it back to Best Buy?
Yeah, that's, of course, the issue, isn't it?
It is the issue. You know, you can buy readers and they work for run-of-the-mill difficulties with your eyes if you can no longer see fine print. But if you have great differences between eyes, like I have, or if you have astigmatism, those glasses aren't going to work very well for you.
Right.
But
in reality, there are other reasons why glasses won't help other than just with age-related macular degeneration. But the reality is that we haven't collectively chosen to deal with that either. And I think
No.
that's what I'm hearing is the same thing regarding hearing, because we just don't yet consider it the priority it probably needs to be.
No, and of course the baby boomers are aging, Michael, big time. You know, the oldest ones are turning, is it 77 this year? And we know that while hearing loss, its origins are going to start in your 30s and 40s, you know, and as far as hearing loss goes, it's important not to be exposed to noise. It's important to live a healthy life. It's also important to choose your parents wisely, because if they had hearing trouble, the odds are you are going to be dealing with it also. But hearing loss definitely accelerates in our 70s and 80s. I've seen this very clearly with my mother, and she's now to the point where she has to wear her hearing aids all the time. Otherwise, she misses out, and she doesn't like to do that. And that means that as the baby boomers age, I think there will be more and more attention paid to the fact that hearing has a significant effect on our quality of life. And there's now also some studies to show that having hearing loss is a contributing factor to an earlier onset of dementia. It doesn't mean it's going to cause dementia, but it's going to contribute. And untreated hearing loss has been identified as one of those risk factors. So
why is that? Do you have any notion?
If you don't hear well, if you kind of check out, so to speak, of conversation, if you're not involved with hearing, that part of the brain is no longer stimulated. And it means that you have to pay more attention to hearing. You have to allocate, if you will, more of your available brain power to hear. And that's taxing on a person. And so if you have somewhere in your genetic makeup the fact that you may be prone to dementia, if there is a family member with dementia and you have beginning hearing loss, I would be the first person to go and do something about my hearing, because I know that having hearing loss contributes, accelerates the onset of dementia, if you will. So that's usually when people say, well, when should I start with hearing aids? I said, if you have hearing loss, if there is a risk factor, if your parents have hearing loss, that means that you could be at risk for greater hearing loss as you age. And then if there's dementia in the family, I would start sooner rather than later.
I'm curious to see if you're aware of this in any way. Have any similar studies been done regarding the whole concept of eyesight and loss of eyesight? Do you know?
I don't.
Have to
It's
look
a great
into that.
question, though. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to make a note of it myself. So if I find anything, I'll let you know.
Please, it would be interesting to know about that, because I think that my belief anyway is that the reality is we get a lot more information. Each of us gets a lot more information from what we hear than what we see, no matter how good our eyesight is, because eyesight is still only really about 100, if that much, 180 degrees roughly. So you don't you don't see what's behind you. You don't see what's above you unless you look.
Yeah.
And typically you look because you hear. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, our ears, it just one example how incredible our ears are, right? First of all, they're attached to our brain, which is very important in the point that I'm trying to make, in that if you go to the beach, Michael, you don't have sight, but if I close my eyes, I can hear the birds flying up above. In front of me, I can hear little children. Behind me, I can hear cars going to a parking lot. I can hear the waves. I can hear the wind. And I mean, it's a complete scape. I can hear all this by just simply paying attention. And if I hear people talk and I think they use the word Juliet in conversation, oh my God, my brain is just going to go zoom and try and focus on what these people are saying, because I think they're talking about me. When you wear hearing aids, Michael, all the sound is right in the ear. The ability to focus on sounds in the front and in the back and up above and below is diminished. And that's it. It's really, it goes from 3D to maybe 2D or 1D. And that means that consumers really have a hard time picking out voices from background noise, no matter how good the hearing aids are.
Are there any technological advances coming that will be able to reintroduce that multidimensional soundscape so that people will be able to tell directionality again?
Not that I'm aware of. What I am aware of is that there is a lot of work being done on Bluetooth LE audio. And that's eventually going to allow somebody with a smartphone to share audio from their phone to multiple headsets. And the hope, it's not been accomplished yet, is that there will be a public assistive listening system available with Bluetooth LE audio as well. They've named the technology Auracast, and that might mean that these silent televisions at airports can be made audible if a consumer uses their smartphone and wireless earplugs. But eventually it would also mean that there could be audio broadcast from public places direct into hearing aids. Now, hearing aids are very small. They have very small antennas. We don't know what kind of audio delays there are going to be, but the Bluetooth Special Interest Group is working very hard to try and include hearing aids as individual receivers for the broadcast of Bluetooth LE audio. And while they hope that this is going to happen in a year or two, I think it's going to take much longer. But if that happens, people with hearing aids are going to be able to hear announcements at an airport, get the audio from their TV or their smartphone, and in church, if the church has this technology installed, hear this technology in their hearing aids. But it's a heavy lift, if you will. Consumers will all need new hearing aids, all need new smartphones. I mean, these dongles have to be installed the world over, while there are a lot of countries, including the UK, that have mandated hearing loop technology as the technology of choice. So there have to have been made some changes in the law for that to happen. I estimate about 10 years or so.
There is something called binaural sound and binaural microphones, where you can have a microphone or two microphones that actually give you the ability to record directionality, and you can use earphones and actually hear sound that sounds like, well, it could be coming from any direction. And I've seen and heard some really great demonstrations of binaural sound where, listening through regular earphones, it even sounds like a person is behind me and talking, but they're using these microphones They're not overly expensive, but it would be interesting to see how somebody could bring some of that binaural technology into what happens with hearing aids.
Yeah. And of course, it would require the use of microphones. And everything hinges on
Well,
proper use of microphones, as
sure,
you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it is something to look at as the demand grows for being able to have technology that allows people to hear better.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting
Yeah.
to see how it goes. I
And
have a
my
question.
guess is, yeah, my guess is that the gaming industry will be all over this. You know,
I
this
hope
is,
so. The gaming
yeah.
industry should. It would make it more possible for, if they did it right, for me to be able to play games than it does. If you talk about virtual reality,
Yeah.
if they truly did that and built in the rest of the interfacing technology to allow me to be able to access games, you're
Yeah.
right. It would be interesting and it would be worth doing. I have a question
Yeah.
that's unrelated somewhat to all this. You have used the term deaf and hard of hearing, and you have avoided hearing impaired. Why?
Generally, and you know, there's people who are hard of hearing who don't like the term hard of hearing. They call themselves a person with hearing loss. Some people prefer the term hard of hearing. A lot of people don't like the term hearing impaired.
Right.
And
why?
I think it's much more it's a sensitivity, you know, how they feel about their own hearing loss. So if you're born hard of hearing, it is what it is, but your hearing isn't impaired. You were born that way. But if I have not used the word deaf, is that in the hard of hearing community, deaf implies that there is no ability to hear sound.
Mhm.
And people like that generally don't wear hearing aids. They use sign language, and estimates are between 1% and 3% of all people with hearing loss are essentially deaf and use sign language to communicate. The other 97% use hearing aids to hear speech. And so frequently they don't use the term deaf, although sometimes they will, just to make it simple. You know, they say, I'm deaf, and then people think, oh, this person can't hear. No worries, I will wave to you when it's time to board the airplane, for example.
Yet in our society, and this is why I asked the question, not setting you up, but just to make the dichotomy comparison, we still refer to people as blind or visually impaired. And visually impaired has two connotation problems. One, visually, I don't think that overall you can say I'm different because I happen to not see. So visually, I don't look different. And impaired, again, the same thing. And I think that it's exactly what you say. We're not impaired, but that's still what we use because people so greatly emphasize eyesight over anything else. And if we've heard something today with you that makes a lot of sense, it's in reality, we do get more information from what we hear, but we don't tend to focus on that because we are taught that without eyesight and to a degree without being able to hear, we're just lost souls. And that's just not the way it is at all.
No. And the Hearing Loss Association of America once a year has a conference. And it's, you know, in different areas of the country. It's anywhere between, 500 and 1,500 people who attend these conferences. And people with hearing loss, it's a spectrum. I want to call it a spectrum disorder. Some people have very mild hearing loss, but their ears have so much trouble discriminating speech that they really struggle and almost function as if they're deaf. And there are people who are very hard of hearing, but as long as they're wearing a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, they do quite well. But the conferences focuses on how to live better with hearing loss, what technology can do for you. I mean, there have been such tremendous changes and improvements in technology that if listeners have family members who are very hard of hearing, who are really struggling with hearing aids, I encourage them to look into cochlear implants. They can be life-changing. Cochlear implants can be of benefit of people who have lost almost all of their hearing, and with the implant are able to hear again at the 3 to 6 foot distance with great ease. So lots of technology upgrades, but there's still devices with microphones on the ears, and for that reason, they still need assistive technology. And that's why, I won't be without work as a hearing loop advocate.
For a long time. You mentioned to me somewhere along the line that you're doing some work with Google Maps.
We are. And
tell me about that, if you would, please.
Well, I'm very excited to talk about this, because as a consumer, how do you know where a hearing loop is installed, right? There are some websites that try and keep track of where these loops are installed, but Google Maps, as part of its accessibility feature, is now permitting businesses to list hearing loops as an accommodation. And you're probably familiar with the fact that Google Maps lists whether a place is accessible for wheelchair users, whether the bathrooms are accessible, or whether they have wheelchair ramps. Well, they now also permit the mentioning of assistive hearing loops. And the best place at this time to go is the hearingloss.org website, and Google the word GITL, GITHL, which stands for Get in the Hearing Loop, because the hearing loop advocates in the Hearing Loss Association have developed a complete toolkit and a Google Maps toolkit so that we can educate consumers how to find these hearing loops on the web. And if you don't find one, but you sure wish there was one, we teach people how to write reviews on Google Maps, because, reviews work. When you go to a restaurant, what do? I personally check the reviews before I make a reservation. And so if these reviews list that consumers love the hearing loop that they have installed, businesses are going to be more aware that this type of accommodation pays off, is important, right? Absolutely.
Before we close, I thought it would be fun to do one more demo with something that we did before we started. And I do it because I want people to understand why we do the podcast the way we do, because I always ask people who come on to provide us with them using a microphone and not just a built-in laptop microphone. And I'm going to show you why it's important that, like you did today, your audio was great. You use a headset. Here's what it sounds like if you're listening, or if you're speaking to me and you're just using your laptop computer microphone. Check this out. Okay, I have now switched to the microphone built into my camera, and you can hear what the total difference is. It's horrible. And this is what we don't ever like to get on podcasts, because what we want people to be able to do is to hear our podcasts well, right?
That's right. That's right. And and Michael, I have done that same demonstration just by removing my headset and moving it about 2 feet from my mouth. This is about as far as my arms will reach. And now I'll put the microphone back on my ears, and people go, whoa, that's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. And even the reverberations are less from your microphone than they are from the laptop microphone, which is omnidirectional and supposed to be able to pick things up from a distance. But it sounds horrible.
It sounds horrible. And because we've all been on Zoom, we are far more aware, but people with, and as a normal hearing person, one can accommodate for those changes. It takes more effort, but I could listen to you if I had to, right? But a person with hearing loss who is already hanging on by their fingertips, so to speak, in order to hear you, because maybe you talk fast or maybe you have an accent, if you talk through your video microphone, that person will fall off the cliff. Their fingers are going to have to let go because they struggle already so much. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize how much my patients were struggling in those public places until I got involved with hearing loops. And then it was the quarter dropped. It's like, well, of course they can hear better in a loop. And so that just motivated me to go at this even harder. And I'm happy to say it's a message that's resonating around the world, around the country, and people are listening. And your podcast, thank you, Michael, is going to make a difference.
Well, I hope so. And we really appreciate you being here as well. Tell me and tell the folks listening, how can they maybe reach out to you, learn more about this, contact you, and so on?
Yep. I have a little website called Loop Wisconsin, www.loopwisconsin.com. And my email, my contact information is right on the website. They can also reach out to the Get in the Hearing Loop Committee from HLAA. And again, if they go to the hearingloss.org website and click on Hearing Loop Resources, they'll be able to find an email address there. And then a whole group of hearing loop advocates will jump into gear. So if people have questions about loops or about whether their hearing aids have T-Coils, we are all very willing to help. If you don't ask, you won't get the help, right?
Exactly right. And I also know that we met you through Sheldon Lewis at Accessibe.
We did.
So where does Accessibe fit into what you do?
I reached out to Accessibe to see what I could do to make my website accessible for people with disabilities. And Accessibe got me in touch with Sheldon, and I can't say enough about the contacts that I have made through Accessibe and how Accessibe has helped to kind of get that message out there. I think they've been very focused on people who are blind or people who are mobility impaired, but I don't think they had given hearing loss and hearing accessibility a lot of thought. And I tell you, they've pulled out all stops. So I want to thank Accessibe for doing what it's done for this technology. And I just had a blog posted, and I will send you the link, Michael, so that you can add it to your notes.
Please.
Yeah, it was just posted last week by Accessibe.
Actually, I think Accessibe has given a lot of thought, but some of the things that Accessibe does with the artificial intelligence widget and so on are not as easy to, at present, bring into the automated world from a standpoint of deaf or hard of hearing. That is still technology that has to catch up a lot. So it has to be done more through manual remediation, but Accessibe is aware of it. So it's great that you and Accessibe have established a relationship that I think will help. Well, I want to thank you again for being here. We were supposed to do this for an hour, and we are now up to 70 minutes because we're having way too much fun here, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, you and I could probably talk another half hour, but
we could. But I think they might get bored with us. So I want to thank you again for being here. And I want to thank you for listening to us. please reach out. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments about this today. Juliëtte has been wonderful. You can reach me at Michael H.I. at accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. Also invite you to go to my podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And wherever you're listening to the podcast today, like on Apple, iTunes, or wherever, please give us a 5-star review. We appreciate your reviews. We appreciate your thoughts, but I would really appreciate you reaching out to me and telling me what you thought, things that we ought to improve, or if you love us, that's great too. And if you know of more guests that we ought to have, and Juliëtte, you as well, if you know of other people who we ought to have on as guests on Unstoppable Mindset, we would love to hear from you about that. So again, Juliëtte, I want to thank you for being here and educating us a whole lot today. This has been absolutely enjoyable and fun.
Thank you very much, Michael.